Hi, so welcome to the second part of today's lessons. We're going to be looking at the carbon cycle. So we're going to be looking at how matter flows through abiotic and biotic components of an ecosystem. So please write down your learning target on the top of your carbon cycle note sheet at this point in time. So the carbon cycle. The reason why we're focusing mostly on the carbon cycle is because of its importance. There are other cycles out there. There's the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle, the water cycle, the sulfur cycle. All of those things have to do with cycling matter through ecosystems. But we're going to focus on just the one because we only have so much time, and that cycle is the carbon cycle. Now, why is it that we want to focus on the carbon cycle? Well, because it has something to do with that energy and the trophic levels that we did in the last video. We understand that the energy transfers from one trophic level to the next, to the next, to the next, and somehow the energy is displaced and goes out into the environment, but the matter that's in those trophic levels it just doesn't go away at the top of the trophic level. Somehow that matter has to get back down to the bottom so that it can start again, because what we have when we talk about energy, it's different than matter, because the matter that we have here on this planet is the matter that we have that we can use, and that's here. It's a limited amount. And so somehow we need to cycle it back down to the bottom of those trophic levels so that it can move its way back up the trophic levels and then back down, and so on and so forth. And if you're remembered in the last video, we talked about that last pyramid had a very specific and very important organism called decomposers. And those decomposers are the ones that are going to cycle carbon back to other levels that aren't necessarily needing it for consumption, but it brings everything kind of full circle. So let's look at the carbon cycle. Why is it that we need to talk about the carbon cycle? Why is that the one we're focused on? Well, don't forget about macromolecules, because our macromolecules have to do with the energy. So that's how we're tying carbon cycle into the energy and ecosystems that we had in the last video. So if you take a look at this, here are macromolecules. Hopefully now you remember those. Now remember I hinted in the last video, like if you don't remember how energy gets stored, well here is your answer. Now remember that our amino acids here and our nucleic acids or nucleobases, nucleotides, and that kind of stuff over here, they don't necessarily provide us with energy. The ones that we consider energy sources are these two right here. If you remember correctly, those are fatty acids or lipids, and our carbohydrates. Okay, now where does carbon come into play? I see one carbon here, and that's it. Well, take a look at those red arrows. Wherever you see those red arrows, that is actually a carbon in this molecule. So this is an example of a fatty acid. So there's a bunch of carbons that could be here. There's a carbon at each one of these points. So carbon makes up all of these, is the basis for all of these molecules that we need to survive. And so that's why we're going to look at carbon. Carbon is super duper important for survival, because it is the keystone element in all of these molecules that we need for survival. All right, so here's the sheet that you need to fill in. This is your note sheet, and there are some things that we're going to have you answer on the backside. But these are things that you need to fill in, okay? So you can see that there are ovals, and there are little names that are missing on the line here. I'm going to give those to you, but you need to kind of think about this. There are things at the bottom here that you need to do. So blue are all abiotic locations. So you are going to shade if it is an abiotic location. Red if it's abiotic to biotic arrow. So that means a red arrow is going to be something that moves from an abiotic location to a biotic location. Green are all the biotic locations. Orange is biotic to biotic. That means you have biotic and it moves into another biotic location. Yellow is abiotic to abiotic, and purple is biotic to abiotic. So now, Mr. Roberts, you're using these terms and we haven't really talked about them. Well, here you go. Biotic, bio meaning life. So biotic are living things. Abiotic, a without, so without life. So abiotic are all locations where carbon can be that are non-living. Biotic are all the living locations. So that means carbon stored in living things. So now you know that an abiotic going to a biotic is non-living to a living. So now you should have that information, and as we go through the notes, you should be able to color code your diagram accordingly. So let's get into this. Here is what your diagram should look like. There are all these things. Atmosphere. We know that carbon dioxide, something that we know is in the atmosphere, it is a greenhouse gas. We know it's there. It's something that's important to the carbon cycle. There's a bunch of it in the atmosphere, but there's other locations that carbon dioxide or carbon can be stored. So we have carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, okay? And one thing we learned in the last video is that photosynthesis needs carbon dioxide. Well, once it uses the process of photosynthesis, it gets stored in biomass, okay? Well, what does that actually mean, biomass? A lot of people think of it as just plants, but don't forget that there's something missing here. And biomass can be any of these things. Biomass can be the plants, it can be this cute little hippo here, it can be the insects, and it can be humans. So when we look at the idea of biomass, that's anything that's living. So really, I actually would like you to add something here. Biomass, I would like you to split and kind of add to your diagram, biomass, plants, and animals. Okay? Now the plants, when we talk about litter fall, okay, litter fall is plants because that's when the plants die or the leaves fall to the ground and that goes back into the soil. Our decomposers break down that organic material and it goes back into soil. That is going to be litter fall. But if you think about it, all biomass aren't plants. So what happens? Well, you have to think about the fact that respiration, decomposition, litter fall, they all kind of fall into the same category. So where there is a release back into the environment of carbon. So when the leaves fall and the decomposers break it down, that goes back into the soil. When, unfortunately, at some point in time, we die, or other things die, like fish in the aquatic system, or us, or your favorite pets, unfortunately, they get broken down by decomposers too, and that carbon goes back into the cycle. So that is biomass. I just want you guys to understand it. But there's other ways that things can happen here. So atmosphere, excuse me, atmospheric CO2 can actually be absorbed by oceans, or it can be absorbed by oceans, and so it's like dissolved within the ocean water. Or you have all those organisms that live in the ocean. Sooner or later they die, and they don't just magically disappear. But if you're living in the ocean and you die, where do you end up at some point in time? Well, you end up at the bottom. So that is called sedimentation, because that sediment gets added to the bottom. And they can get stored in the carbonates that are dissolved carbonates, or it can actually be stored in carbonates, as in like the rock itself. There's the material that builds up at the bottom of the ocean, and that rock formation stores carbon. We have soil, and that was like the litter fall or decomposition, that the biomass, it can actually be returned to the soil. Well, we have all these bacteria in the soil, and so when they're breaking down organic material, they go through respiration because they're bacteria. So bacteria and other decomposers, they go through cellular respiration, so they're giving off CO2. So as they're breaking down that organic material, they release CO2 into the atmosphere. The biomass themselves, so that's us. Like right now, if I'm not checking to see if I have bad breath, but I know that I'm breathing something out, and part of what I'm breathing out is carbon dioxide. So that carbon gets returned to the atmosphere. All living things, your pet dog, your pet cat, all of the animals that are out in those ecosystems, they are going through cellular respiration. So that cellular respiration produces CO2 and it goes up into the atmosphere. We have another one over here that on the kind of more on the unnatural side of things. Now, fossil fuels are natural. That's when we had all this organic material like biomass or like the things that were living in the ocean, and it gets built up on land, and there's big pockets of organic material that get built up, and it actually soil builds up on top, and it gets compressed, and we get coal or oil. Well, it's natural, but humans are actually taking that oil or the coal, and we're burning it. We're using it as a fuel source. So that stuff that we're mining from the earth, those fossil fuels, we burn them, and the byproduct of burning anything, it's not just fossil fuels, the byproduct of burning anything through combustion is CO2. So that carbon material goes up into the atmosphere. So you have all of these sources of CO2 here going back into the atmosphere. If you think about it, if this was a balanced system, it'd be perfect, but it's, as of right now, if you think about the big picture of things, there's actually more on this side than being taken out. So that's a whole nother topic, but right now what you need to understand is here are the things that are releasing carbon up into the atmosphere. Here's how they're taken out of the atmosphere. Where are biotic components? And I want you guys to realize that in this case, we are going to consider soil because of all those little organic, those microscopic organisms, macroorganisms, microorganisms that are in the soil. So the one that people usually get tricked on here is soil. Soil is actually a biotic component, okay? Usually you think of dirt as non-living, but in this case it is biotic. So now what you need to do is color code appropriately, fill in the arrows, and go from there. Once you have that done, you are going to look at the processes here. So like burning, dissolving, photosynthesis. What is a description? So like what's happening here? How is that carbon being released or absorbed? And which way is carbon flowing? Is it abiotic to biotic? And then the second thing here is give an example of carbon moving from one location. Name the process, allows the movement in a dashed line. Demonstrate the transfer of carbon. So what I want you to think about is not necessarily the generic things that are on the diagram, but I want you to come up with your own. So here is a biotic factor. Here's how it gets to an abiotic. So give me specific examples. I want you guys to think about those and come up with, well, here's the biotic factor or biotic location. Here's the abiotic factor, and what would that process in between be called? And then question 6, independently, obviously you're doing this all on your own anyways, is describe where the carbon cycle, so where do we have the biggest impact? So if we are impacting the carbon cycle, where are humans having the greatest impact on the cycle and how we might be thrown off the balance in this cycle? And that's it. So you guys have a great rest of your day and finish up your notes, and we'll see you later.